The art of emotional strategy beyond management to mastery. Most people mistakenly view emotion as a mere leak, something that inadvertently escapes something they either desperately try to suppress or flaunt openly hoping for understanding. They approach their feelings and the feelings of others as something to simply manage. But Machiavelli, with his piercing insight, saw emotion not as a chaotic force to be contained, but as a potent weapon to be deployed. While others were passively led by their feelings, he actively used what he felt, and more critically, what others felt like strings on a master's marionette. Pull one string, pause another, and observe the intricate dance of human behavior. He wasn't emotionless, he was emotionally strategic. This particular tactic, one that remains largely undiscussed and vastly underestimated, wasn't about controlling people through sheer coldness or intimidation. On the contrary, it lay in his sophisticated use of warmth, vulnerability, intensity, and subtle displays of feeling to secure power, forge unbreakable alliances, and dismantle even the most robust defenses. He was in every conceivable way an emotional puppeteer, a master of an overlooked weapon in his formidable arsenal. Consider its profound effectiveness. What could be more disarming than a man who appears genuinely moved? What is more inherently persuasive than someone who projects absolute sincerity? And what indeed is more truly dangerous than an individual capable of shedding tears, making heartfelt confessions, admitting profound weaknesses, and yet meaning none of it? This isn't mere theoretical conjecture. It is meticulously documented within the very pages of the Prince Machiavelli's seminal work. Let's delve directly into The Prince itself. In his opening letter to Lorenzo de' Medici, Machiavelli doesn't launch into threats, outline a complex strategy, or immediately lay claim to power. Instead, he begins with a profound, almost startling display of humility. He pens these words: "I hope it will not be thought presumptuous for a man of low and humble status to discuss and lay down rules of princely government." Why would he commence his treatise on power in such a seemingly self effacing manner because he possessed an acute understanding, appearing inferior or below, someone was the swiftest and most effective way to circumvent their defenses and gain access to their inner guard? You don't seize power through overt arrogance or blatant domination. You manipulate power with surgical precision through selective vulnerability. This tactical paradox lies at the very core of the emotional puppeteer's art feel: when it serves, reveal when it stings, disarm when it buys time. Every emotion you choose to display becomes a carefully placed piece of bait. The emotional puppeteer in practice beyond politics to people. Let's dissect how this sophisticated strategy functioned in practice, not just in the grand theater of politics, but in the intricate interactions between individual people. Machiavelli served under Cesare Borgia, the formidable son of Pope Alexander VI, a man as ruthlessly brilliant as he was utterly unforgiving. When Borgia ascended to power, Machiavelli didn't openly challenge him. He didn't attempt to impress him with his own intellectual prowess or strategic acumen. Instead, he chose a different path. He aligned himself emotionally. He meticulously mirrored Borgia's boundless ambition, artfully fed his insatiable ego, and lavishly praised his cunning intellect. Machiavelli wrote admiringly of Borgia's unparalleled ability to deceive, to crush rivals, and to mislead with masterful precision. Yet beneath this outwardly expressed admiration lay a deeply calculated intent. Machiavelli didn't fear Borgia in the conventional sense. He studied him with the detached precision of a scientist observing a complex organism. By praising Borgia, he secured proximity. By projecting an image of unwavering loyalty, he effectively rendered himself invisible as a threat. And by making himself emotionally legible, conveying sentiments such as "I see your genius, I admire it profoundly, and I submit to it," he ensured he would never be perceived as a rival or an obstacle. This reveals the first fundamental principle of the emotional puppeteer. People instinctively lower their guard against those who reflect their own emotional state. When you adeptly mirror someone's feelings, you subtly bypass their ingrained defense mechanisms. If they express anger, you respond with genuine concern. If they are brimming with excitement, you convey a sense of awe. If they exhibit anxiety, you subtly match their emotional pace. They won't consciously register your underlying intent because they will feel profoundly seen and understood. This is precisely how manipulation begins, not with overt control, but with the insidious comfort you inspire. Machiavelli consistently applied this technique in diplomatic settings. When dispatched on critical missions to other city-states, he didn't lead with the overt strength or military might of Florence. Instead, he led with a profound understanding of human nature. He meticulously documented observations on how the leaders of each city-state operated on an emotional level, their unique rhythms, their sources of pride, their specific sensitivities to perceived insults. He then painstakingly crafted every message, every deliberate pause, every nuanced facial expression, not merely for logical coherence, but for its precise emotional consequence. He was in essence mapping the expected reactions of his counterparts before making any decisive moves. Because if you truly understand what someone desires to feel, you possess the key to moving them exactly where you want them to go. This brings us to the second, more sophisticated layer of the tactic: control your public display of emotion, not merely to mask an underlying truth, but to actively create the truth they will react to. This is a psychological sleight of hand so subtle that most people will never even detect it. Machiavelli instinctively grasped that if you shed tears, others will feel pity. If you exhibit hesitation, others will perceive and internalize that pressure. If you maintain an unshakable calm, others will feel fundamentally unstable in comparison. And if you unpredictably flip between disparate emotions, you sow seeds of confusion. And confusion is the fertile ground where persuasion blossoms into outright dominance. In moments of profound uncertainty, people instinctively gravitate towards the most emotionally grounded person in the room. And when that person is you, even if your calm is a meticulously constructed facade, your control over the situation becomes undeniably real. Fortune management, the art of deliberate performance. This is precisely what Machiavelli termed fortune management, not a surrender to fate or chance, but the masterful ability to actively shape others' perception of reality by meticulously controlling your own emotional projection. Think of this as not as outright deception, but as a deliberate and precise performance. You're not necessarily lying, but you are strategically choosing the emotional version of yourself that best suits the immediate situation. This isn't born out of a lack of authenticity, but from the profound understanding that real power means never being emotionally cornered. Now, this is where Machiavelli elevated the tactic to truly dangerous levels. He didn't merely manipulate his own emotions, he became adept at weaponizing the emotions of others. He would identify the overly sensitive man within a council and subtly feed him criticism, just vague enough to trigger a cascade of self doubt. He would publicly praise a rival, but with just enough extravagance to induce overconfidence, leading them to become cocky and ultimately sloppy in their actions. He would deliberately raise hopes during tense negotiations, then abruptly withdraw, intentionally creating confusion and prompting people to chase a sense of clarity they hadn't even desired moments before. Machiavelli understood that emotions don't merely expose people, they drive them with irresistible force. And when someone's feelings are in motion, you don't futilely fight against them. Instead, you artfully steer them. You feed their pride, gently stroke their underlying fears, nod empathetically at their rage, and offer sincere sympathy for their confusion. And as they are swept along by these powerful feelings, you subtly install suggestions, ideas that become their own without them ever realizing your influence. This is emotional puppeteering at its most invisible, its most insidious. The average person observing such a master would likely remark, "He just really understands people," or "She's just naturally warm. She just knows how to talk to you." But no, this is not magic. It is not raw empathy in the conventional sense. It is precision emotional management. Machiavelli wasn't charismatic in the modern superficial sense of the word. He didn't simply smile his way into positions of power. Instead, he read emotion like an assassin reads terrain scanning for every subtle elevation, every hidden shadow, every crucial blind spot. Because when you intimately understand how someone wants to feel, you don't merely influence them, you effectively own them. You are not the most powerful person in the room because you speak the loudest or assert yourself constantly. You are the most powerful because you discreetly control the emotional current without ever revealing the true source of that control. That is the puppeteer's ultimate secret. And in our modern world, obsessed as it is with unbridled self expression, this remains one of the most devastatingly effective and most underestimated forms of dominance. Emotional leverage bypassing logic for influence. Because in today's society, people are explicitly instructed to be emotionally honest, to embrace transparency, to speak their truth. And when an individual adheres to this doctrine, they unwittingly hand over the precise blueprint to their own mind, their needs, their weaknesses, their thresholds, their emotional triggers. But a true puppeteer, a master of this art, gives away nothing, yet subtly pulls everything. Machiavelli would undoubtedly thrive in contemporary power games for one singular reason. He intuitively understood that emotion is the fastest and most direct path to influence, precisely because it bypasses the slower, more cumbersome pathways of logic. You can endlessly debate facts, present irrefutable data, or challenge rational arguments, but you simply cannot debate how someone feels. Therefore, what did he do? He wielded emotions not to prove a point, but to move people into effortless agreement, circumventing any potential resistance. Let's contextualize this within a modern day scenario. Imagine a prominent political leader engaged in a high stakes negotiation behind closed doors. The opposing side is rigid, emotionally distant, and strictly formal in their demeanor. Most individuals would instinctively mirror that formality, believing that pure logic and unassailable evidence will ultimately sway their counterparts. But Machiavelli would take a radically different route. He would deliberately introduce emotional contrast. He might subtly lower his voice, creating an intimate, almost conspiratorial tone. He might then share a moment of deeply personal difficulty, a seemingly unrelated anecdote about immense pressure, about a profound betrayal he once faced, or about the burden of legacy. This vulnerability would be calibrated to be just enough to subtly soften the tense atmosphere in the room. He would make himself appear more profoundly human than any other individual present. Why this calculated display? Because when you are the first to strategically expose emotion, you subtly force others to recalibrate their own internal state. They begin to feel, and when people are operating from a place of feeling, they are no longer rigidly anchored to objective numbers or hard facts. They begin to navigate an internal tension, the innate desire to reciprocate your emotional openness, or the equally strong urge to distance themselves from it. Crucially, both roads inevitably grant you the upper hand. If they attempt to match your emotional transparency, you've successfully forged a connection, albeit a manipulated one. If they try to distance themselves, you've effectively thrown them off balance, making them less secure in their own position. This is what Machiavelli termed the introduction of asymmetry, a state where the opponent is fundamentally disoriented and no longer knows how to correctly position themselves because you've entered the interaction through a door they weren't guarding. And now their logic begins to fray. They are simultaneously grappling with thoughts of emotion, power dynamics, potential consequences, and their own image all at once. You have effectively multiplied their internal processing threads, which means you can now begin to pull them with precision. That is the essence of what a puppeteer does. They don't overpower you with brute force. They splinter your focus. The silent power of calculated withdrawal. Here's another potent tactic derived directly from Machiavelli's documented behavior, calculated silence after an emotional display. Following a moment of apparent vulnerability or an intense emotional projection, he would strategically withdraw. Not abruptly or dramatically, but just enough to leave the other person suspended in an emotional void. This deliberate absence would create profound discomfort and emotional vacuum. People inherently detest emotional vacuums. They instinctively rush to fill them with sympathetic overtures, with unsolicited promises, or with desperate overcorrection. And in that frantic rush, they invariably expose themselves, revealing vulnerabilities and intentions they would otherwise keep guarded. This is precisely how you make your emotions do the heavy lifting for you, not through ostentatious performance, but through meticulous placement. Machiavelli was playing an emotional chessboard, while everyone else was still arguing over the basic rules. Now let's explore the intricate layer of power dynamics within this strategy. Emotional manipulation is only truly effective when you possess a deep understanding of how different individuals assign value to specific feelings. A seasoned soldier values courage above all else. A diplomat prioritizes respect. A wise ruler cherishes their legacy. An ordinary citizen craves fairness. Therefore, if your aim is to effectively pull their emotional strings, you don't merely project your own feelings. Instead, you skillfully reflect theirs back to them, but in a manner so undeniable they cannot possibly ignore it. Machiavelli wouldn't simply state, "This is what I think." He would assert, "This is how I know you feel." He would artfully frame their internal world for them through his carefully chosen words. Consequently, when they responded, they were already operating within the precise emotional and psychological structure he had meticulously constructed. Here's a perfect example of this from The Prince itself. Machiavelli writes, "A man who wishes to profess goodness at all times will come to ruin among so many who are not good." This isn't merely a cautionary warning, it's a calculated emotional provocation. It's designed to induce deep discomfort in the reader, to compel them to question their own inherent softness, their idealism, their naivete. And once they experience that internal pressure, that unsettling emotional dissonance, they become inherently ready to accept the far harsher lesson that follows, therefore learn to be not good when circumstances demand it. That is the pivotal moment, the strategic pivot point. He leverages emotional dissonance, the latent shame of being naive, the visceral fear of appearing weak to propel the reader towards a state of necessary ruthlessness. That is not persuasion in the traditional sense. That is a form of programming. You are made to feel something unsettling. Then you instinctively desire to resolve that feeling. He provides a predefined path, and you willingly take it, mistakenly believing it was your own conscious choice, when in fact it never was. The environmental engineer shaping emotional atmospheres. And here's where Machiavelli's genius delves even deeper. A true emotional puppeteer doesn't merely pull individual strings in isolation. They master the art of controlling how people respond to each other within a given environment. Machiavelli would walk into a council of leaders, and if his objective was to isolate a specific individual, he would never confront them directly. Instead, he would expertly redirect emotional attention. He might offer a subtle yet potent praise for another person's insight, just enough to spark quiet envy in the room. He might engage in a brief, seemingly innocuous joke with a rival's ally, creating the illusion of a deeper bond. He might then insert a faint, almost passing comment about someone's past betrayal, not as an outright accusation, but as a subtle expression of curiosity. And then he would fall silent. At this point, the room is no longer cohesive. It's fractured, emotionally unstable. A subtle undercurrent of paranoia has been introduced. Everyone begins to recalibrate their positions, their alliances, their perceptions. But the puppeteer Machiavelli has done nothing overtly. He has simply tilted the emotional air. This is precisely how the puppeteer remains invisible. They never appear to be the direct source of the emotions they skillfully induce. They remain outwardly centered, calmly observant, while everyone else frantically rearranges themselves around the subtle tension they created. This isn't cruelty in the traditional sense. This is design. And once you truly see it, you realize that most people are not even aware of this game. They are merely reacting, explaining, justifying. But the ones who consistently rise to the top, they are doing what Machiavelli mastered centuries ago, not overtly controlling people, but subtly controlling what people feel when they are around you. There's a critical reason why the most dangerous individuals are rarely the most overtly emotional, nor are they the most completely detached. They reside in a strategic middle ground. One moment they exude the cold precision of steel. The next, their voices warm and inviting. One moment they offer flattering praise. The next, they deliver a sharp, dispassionate correction. They are unpredictable, not because they are erratic or unstable, but because they are deliberately inconsistent in their emotional displays. Machiavelli intuitively grasped this. The more consistent your emotional behavior, the easier you become to manipulate. But if someone cannot predict how you will respond, they cannot effectively plan against you. This strategic inconsistency is precisely what made Machiavelli so formidable to his enemies. He could be dismissive and cold in private, yet remarkably generous and affable in public. He was brutal in his strategic thinking, yet effortlessly charming in his letters. His vast emotional range wasn't a personal flaw. It was a carefully constructed facade, a sophisticated toolkit. In The Prince, he doesn't advocate for emotional rigidity. He doesn't preach perpetual stoicism. On the contrary, he states that a prince must be a great pretender and dissembler. That word dissembler is everything. It means to artfully hide one's true nature under a carefully chosen mask of reaction. It signifies the ability to display any emotion, yet be owned by none. This is emotional contradiction as a tactic. When you deliberately contradict people's expectations, not just once, but repeatedly, they become fundamentally unsure of the unspoken rules of engagement. And once those emotional rules break down, they cease strategizing themselves. They simply become reactive. The illusion of depth commanding through presence. Here's how this plays out in a contemporary setting. Imagine you manage a team. Your usual demeanor is strict, clear, maintaining high standards, and emotionally neutral. This has become the established expectation. Then, without any warning, you reveal a personal side. You mention something deeply personal that recently shook you. This isn't a performative act, but an intentional brief glimpse. You pause, allowing the vulnerability to land, and then you revert to your usual strict demeanor. What has just transpired, you've effectively shattered the established emotional pattern. Your team members begin to question their previous map of you. Is he more complex than we thought? Does he feel more than he lets on? Did I vastly underestimate how deeply he observes us? Now you are no longer merely a role or a position. You are a presence, and commanding presences are far more difficult to negotiate with than fixed positions. This was Machiavelli's recurring masterstroke, even in his writing. His personal letters to friends were warm, witty, even self-deprecating. But his political commentary, ice-cold, brutal, and relentlessly efficient. Why this sharp emotional contrast? Because emotional contrast compels closer attention. When someone is perpetually intense, you eventually tune them out. When someone is always calm, you assume nothing genuinely shakes them. But when an individual strategically switches, when they blend warmth with coldness, openness with stringent control, you become instantly alert. That's precisely what Machiavelli desired, not for people to admire him, but for them to never feel completely comfortable in his presence. Because emotional comfort breeds carelessness, but emotional uncertainty cultivates extreme caution. Now let's explore a crucial aspect of the puppeteer tactic that few truly comprehend. You don't need to manipulate everyone. You only need to subtly unsettle the influential one. Machiavelli never wasted effort trying to sway entire crowds with raw, overt emotion. He meticulously targeted key individuals, the pivotal influencer, the central pivot point in the room. He would observe who others instinctively looked to before responding, who they silently deferred to, who exuded an unspoken subtle dominance. Then he would emotionally engage that person with a carefully timed tone shift, a subtly planted phrase, or a deliberate contradiction that threw them off balance just enough to fundamentally alter the emotional temperature of the entire group. Because emotions in essence spreads, it is inherently contagious. You don't need to move everyone, you only need to move the one holding the strings. That is how the puppeteer operates from the shadows. And if you mistakenly believe this is confined to abstract political theory, reconsider. Modern influencers, shrewd CEOs, and cunning media personalities, the most effective among them, employ this very tactic constantly. They might project an image of profound emotional transparency in interviews, vulnerable, humble, intensely expressive. Yet in private, they are calculating, measured, and utterly icy. They deliberately contradict established expectations, and that very contradiction becomes their power. People become consumed with trying to decode them, obsessing over when they are being real. But here's the brutal truth. There is no real in this context. There is only useful. That was Machiavelli's profound understanding. He didn't believe in a fixed emotional identity. He believed in emotional adaptability with strategic intent. He would feel emotions deeply, yes, but only reveal what the moment precisely required. He would care, but never allow the caring to compromise his clarity of purpose. And when he needed to sway someone, he wouldn't out-argue them. He would out-feel them by presenting the precise emotion they needed to see in order to drop their guard, doubt their own viewpoint, or powerfully reinforce their implicit need for him. This is where emotional contradiction transforms into a potent weapon of obedience, because people don't truly fear what they fully understand. They fear what they almost understand but can't quite predict. So if you are perpetually calm, they will try to break you. If you are always aggressive, they will attempt to tame you. But if you are occasionally gentle and occasionally brutal, they don't try anything at all. They simply watch. They wait. They second guess themselves. And now you are leading the game, not with overt power, but with an enigmatic presence. Machiavelli would call this the illusion of depth, where you appear to be more layered and complex than anyone else in the room, even if you are not. Because once they perceive you as deep, they stop treating you like a mere player and begin to treat you like the entire board. Influence can be temporary, control can be fleeting, but dependence that truly lasts. And Machiavelli understood that there was no stronger form of emotional power than creating dependency without resorting to overt force. That is where the true puppet strings are cunningly hidden, not in visible dominance, but in the invisible emotional contracts people unknowingly sign. Most assume control implies intimidation, a hierarchy built on fear. But Machiavelli frequently employed the inverse. He would win people over through calculated emotional generosity, subtle empathy, or precisely timed moments of profound understanding, and then he would create just enough absence that they would come chasing him. The master of the unseen tether, emotional chains. This marks the fourth and perhaps most subtle layer of the emotional puppeteer's art. Give them emotional safety, once then strategically withdraw it. Not to punish, but to precisely position yourself. When you make someone feel deeply understood, even for a fleeting moment, you trigger a powerful, almost irresistible illusion within them. They get me. They truly see me. And once someone feels profoundly seen by you, they instinctively begin to seek your validation often without consciously realizing it. They will recalibrate their language. They will subtly adjust their posture. They will desperately try to maintain access to your emotional center, which they now perceive as their anchor. And at this point, you are no longer just a mere presence in the room. You have become their anchor. This tactic is most profoundly effective when executed with quiet subtlety. You don't reward them with overt praise. You don't react in the predictable ways they might expect. Instead, you withhold. And it is that precise withholding, that deliberate silence, that absence of emotional confirmation that begins to insidiously gnaw at them. They start doing the work for you, anticipating what will please you, frantically, attempting to regain what they mistakenly believe they have lost. Machiavelli employed this strategy relentlessly in his diplomatic endeavors. He would compose warm, open, and deeply respectful letters to specific individuals, detailing not merely policies or strategies, but deeply personal feelings. He would express profound admiration, even what appeared to be genuine affection. He would meticulously build rapport, create a sense of alignment, and foster shared understanding. Then, without explanation, he would simply stop writing, and in the emotional vacuum he deliberately left, others would write back to him more revealingly, more eagerly, more emotionally invested than ever before. They craved the connection back. They yearned to feel seen by him once more. This is how you effectively entrap someone without resorting to overt threats. You create a powerful feeling they desperately want to preserve, and then you deliberately let them chase it. Because once someone is emotionally chasing you, they are no longer objectively measuring your value. They are frantically attempting to maintain an internal emotional balance, a balance that you now control. This is the essence of emotional leverage, and it operates with devastating effectiveness in every single domain of human interaction. In personal relationships, you listen more deeply and attentively than anyone else. You forge genuine connections. You reveal something deeply personal, something vulnerable. Then you strategically withdraw. They will instinctively lean in harder. In high stakes negotiations, you give early generously and emotionally. Then, when they fully expect agreement, you introduce a subtle hesitation. They will then offer more concessions to maintain the established emotional tone. Within teams, you sincerely validate someone's perspective. The next time, however, you delay your response or offer a more measured affirmation. They will then begin to proactively seek your alignment, not because you demanded it, but because they once experienced the powerful feeling of being truly seen by you. Machiavelli understood this dynamic long before it became a recognized branch of business psychology. But he didn't merely use emotional debt to keep people engaged. He used it to subtly trap them into predictability. Because someone who is constantly striving to win your emotional attention becomes incredibly easy to read. They will inadvertently reveal their deepest insecurities. They will compulsively repeat their arguments. They will over-explain when they sense distance. They will pause more frequently after saying something they are unsure about, anxiously waiting to gauge your facial expression, to read your subtle cues. You become their mirror, but this mirror is subtly rigged. Every reaction you now give, every subtle smile, every moment of silence becomes a powerful signal they desperately try to interpret. They strain to anticipate what you want, how you feel, where you stand. And in doing so, They cease strategizing for themselves. They begin to react to you. That is the precise moment you have flipped the dynamic. You are no longer trying to win them over. They are desperately trying not to lose you. This is the Machiavellian reversal, emotional dominance disguised as warmth. Now, most people who attempt to apply these principles misuse them. They try to simply fake emotional presence or feign vulnerability. But Machiavelli's true genius lay in this. He made his emotional gestures feel profoundly real, not because he was a master actor, but because he meticulously selected which truths to reveal. He wasn't cold in his essence, he was calculatedly warm. He would offer you just enough of his authentic humanity to forge a powerful connection, but never so much as to arm you with a weapon against him. He didn't hide who he was. He simply controlled what version of himself you saw and precisely when you saw it. It's the critical difference between a weapon carelessly left lying on a table and one expertly drawn at the perfect decisive moment. Timing, contrast, and precise intent. These are the elements that separate crude manipulation from true mastery. The ultimate trap, ownership through emotional pride. Now let's unveil the final, most insidious layer of the trap. Let them feel like they are influencing you. Machiavelli would frequently allow someone to convince him to let them genuinely believe their logic or their emotions had successfully swayed him. He would nod, slowly, subtly adjust a sentence in his own argument, or concede a minor, non essential point. He would make them feel intelligent, profoundly respected, and truly heard. But underneath this carefully constructed facade, the ultimate decision had already been made. He understood that nothing binds a person to you more powerfully than the belief that they have genuinely changed you. This creates a powerful surge of emotional pride, and pride in its deceptive strength binds faster and more effectively than mere trust. Because when someone thinks, he listens to me, I matter to him, I shaped that outcome, they begin to emotionally invest deeply in your narrative. They will proactively protect it, vigorously defend it, and tirelessly justify it to others, even if they were never the true steering force behind the outcome. They feel a powerful sense of ownership. And ownership, in this context, is loyalty in disguise. By the time they belatedly realize it wasn't genuine influence, they are already firmly ensnared within your meticulously crafted structure, already defending you to others, already tangled in a complex web of feelings they can't fully explain. That is how Machiavelli won without resorting to overt threats. That is how he transformed seemingly benign emotional gestures into unbreakable behavioral chains. That is how he built alliances where others foolishly believed they had forged genuine friendships. The puppeteer doesn't pull with brute force, he moves with feeling, and by the time you realize you are dancing, the strings are already invisibly tied. Machiavelli's genius didn't culminate with the one-on-one manipulation of individual feelings. That was merely the surface layer of his profound artistry. What truly rendered him lethal was his unparalleled ability to shape an entire environment, a psychological and emotional atmosphere, where emotions consistently worked in his favor, often without him even needing to be physically present. He didn't just manage people, he engineered atmospheres. Because once you grasp how individuals respond emotionally, not just to you, but to each other, you transcend the need to manually pull every single string. You begin to build systems that automatically trigger the same desired emotions again and again, like an emotional machine that operates autonomously. This is where his mastery transcended mere personality and evolved into structural power. Observe the courts. He advised the councils he served on the political systems he meticulously praised and studied. He wasn't solely concerned with abstract laws, grand titles, or explicit orders. He paid obsessive attention to the subtle emotional tone of every single structure. What precise conditions make people afraid to speak their minds? What underlying desires make them desperate for proximity and approval? What rewards are perceived as intimately personal, even if objectively minor? What punishments feel profoundly personal, even if symbolically enacted, because power is most stable, most enduring when people regulate their own behavior, not out of rigid rules, but out of deeply ingrained feelings. Machiavelli admired this principle most profoundly in Cesare Borgia's rise to power. It wasn't just the ruthless killings or the brazen betrayals that impressed him. It was the meticulously crafted emotional climate. Borgia engineered a climate where no one was ever entirely sure who was currently favored, who would be the next target, or what the true ultimate cost of loyalty would be. And yet, paradoxically, everyone competed fiercely to prove their unwavering devotion. It wasn't about crude terror. It was about pervasive emotional instability. Borgia created a system where people simply could not find equilibrium. Consequently, they instinctively reached for it by becoming more obedient, more fanatically committed, and more overtly performative in their loyalty. That is the highest form of puppeteering, making people feel that their very survival, their identity, or their inherent worth is inextricably linked to a constantly shifting emotional standard. And once they internalize and buy into that profound illusion, they no longer need to be explicitly told what to do. They will volunteer to maintain the very illusion that controls them. We observe this insidious dynamic everywhere today. In workplaces, where the boss provides ambiguous or infrequent feedback, employees become obsessed with interpreting their facial expressions and subtle gestures. In social groups, where silence is instantly interpreted as punishment and attention becomes a coveted form of currency. In families, where love is offered inconsistently leading children to grow into adults who desperately try to earn it every single day. That isn't chaos. That's a meticulously structured emotional economy, and someone is always discreetly cashing in on it. Machiavelli grasped a fundamental truth. If you make emotion scarce, you imbue attention with immense power. If you make approval rare, you cultivate desperate loyalty. If you make understanding conditional, you compel people to offer their deepest secrets to buy it. This is how kingdoms are sustained, not through brute force or bloodshed, but through intricate, invisible contracts of feeling. Because in the end, the most loyal subjects are not the ones with swords pressed against their backs. They are the ones who are still desperately hoping to be seen, still yearning to be heard, still relentlessly chasing that one elusive moment when the prince or the puppeteer finally turns and grants them a brief, validating nod. A nod that whispers, "You matter." A nod that costs you nothing, yet keeps them bound to you. And when you possess the power to control that precise moment, when you decide when, where, and how someone receives that coveted recognition, you no longer require vast armies, grand titles, or overt threats. You simply need silence, you simply need the pause. You just need them to feel almost, because almost seen is a stronger, more enduring leash than fully embraced. It keeps people perpetually leaning forward, perpetually striving. It keeps people obeying shadows. It keeps people emotionally wrapped around a center you no longer even have to actively defend. That is the final profound lesson. Machiavelli didn't conquer with logic. He didn't dominate with brute strength. He ruled by cunningly installing emotional need and then remaining just out of reach. Because once you master that, you've made them loyal not to you, but to the feeling of wanting you. And that, my friend, is a chain no one can break.